Okay, so movement is essentially what is my profession. I consider movement and all aspects of human movement is what I've been lucky enough to have a profession for the last 15 years. It is something I'm very passionate about. I've learned a lot. I used to have a very narrow mind when it came to movement because I came up in a powerlifting circle. So my idea of movement was very simplistic. And then once I started and got my massage therapy license and started working with chiropractors and PTs, it has expanded. So for those of you here tonight and those of you who are going to be sitting watching this later, I just ask that you have an open mind. I've tried to make stuff very, very easy to digest, right? I'm taking 15 years of experience to try and condense it down into 15, 20 minutes. So if you have questions, please ask them. But other than that, let's roll, man. I'm ready to do this. Share screen. Desktop. All right. Cool. All right, so I think everybody can see that. If you can't, just pop it in the chat. But like I said, we're going to talk about human movement versus gym movement. All right, so like I said at the beginning of my coaching career, gym movement was human movement. And anybody that told me otherwise, I wasn't having that discussion. All right, so when we talked last week, we talked about environment. And the last thing I listed was human movement. To me, movement is the foundation for everything else. We talked about it last week. People are like, I don't know what to do to like get my health in order, right? We just take the walk, just move. And then the next question people ask, well, I don't know how to move. What do I do to move, right? But once we start moving, we start to eat a little better. We start to get outside more. We start to sleep better. We start to build a better relationship with stress. And then it just builds up to this pyramid here with like belief in something greater. So I believe personally that human movement is the foundation for everything. It is the medium that I use as a coach to help people build stronger bodies, minds, relationships, and passions, right? So something I want you to keep in mind when it comes to all movement. I swear by the end of this, you guys are going to look at movement, how people move. Those of you that work with people, you're just going to see things differently. All right. So the law of specificity essentially is we get strong in the positions we are in the most. We get strong in the positions we train the most. What that also means is we get weak in the positions we avoid, and we get weak in the positions we don't train. So all of you sitting right now, if you sat in that position all day, your body would adapt to that because it is very specific to survival for what your body's trying to do. So we have to understand the body just wants to survive the environment in which it's in. That's it. So if you're sitting, your body's going to, oh, cool, this is what we're doing from now on. There's nothing wrong with sitting. But if you sit in the same position for 9 hours with no movement, it can potentially cause an issue. All right. So I use my words very carefully. I will never say sitting is dangerous, because then what do they tell people to do? They just tell them to stand. Right now they're just standing all day. Now they're still not moving. You know, I found a picture the other day. It showed 72 different sitting positions. So sitting is not the problem. It's the lack of movement that can become an issue. Next slide. All right. So if you were to Google fundamental human movements, or if you talk to most coaches and trainer, I'm pretty sure these are the 5 movements they would tell you: squat, push, pull, hinge, and lunge. Right? Well, the foot has 33 joints. If we assume each joint only moves 2 ways, the number of ways the foot can move is 8,589,934,592 ways. That's assuming that each joint can only move 2 ways. More, those joints actually move more. The body has over 300 joints. Right? So my job here is to try and get you guys to disassociate the gym movements from human movements. Okay? So there, the fundamentals of human movement are not squat, push, pull, hinge, lunge, right? Because what do we say? We say the push is either a horizontal or a vertical movement, right? But there's this whole degree of range between horizontal to vertical, right? But you get strong in the positions you train. But if we never train all those ranges, it could potentially cause some issues down the road. Not saying it will, but it could potentially, right? Those are just exercises. And this is where I want you to kind of separate exercise from movement. Because when you ask people, hey, did you move today? The first thing they're going to say is like, no, I didn't exercise. And it's like, no, did you move? Right? What do most people do? They'll sit all day at work. They'll sit in their car, drive to work, sit at work all day, drive in their car, go to cycling class, sit on their bike, get in their car, right? And then they'll say they moved, but they really just sat all day. Okay. So exercise is just an activity that requires physical effort carried out to sustain or improve health or fitness. But movement is just the act of changing physical location or position. So I can sit here and I can turn like this, and I've now changed my position. I've now moved, right? The load I'm facing is gravity. Gravity is constantly stressing my tissue to adapt to, withstand that load. So movement is the bigger circle. Exercise is movement. Well, exercise is, yeah, I have it right here. Exercise is movement, but movement is not always exercise. So when it comes to human movement, this is what I think of. It's breathing, it's crawling, it's walking, it's sprinting, right? Moving for long distances for a long time. It's hanging, it's climbing, it's jumping, it's throwing. So if you study the evolution of movement and what we used to have to do as a species to survive, right? We talked about adaptation last week. We had to be able to move for long distance to hunt. We had to sprint when we either running from something or running towards. We had to be able to jump on things. We had to throw spears, right? We had to throw rocks to try and kill things. And something like coaches, especially strength coaches, they like to reduce movement down because movements can be very complex. And the reason I say movement's complex is like you can get a doctorate degree in kinesiology and biomechanics. Like movement isn't just 5 movements is what I'm trying to get to. Like just the act of hanging or climbing is a very complicated ordeal. Okay. So something, we've all been to PTs, been to chiropractors, we've maybe talked to coaches. They'll tell us we have a dysfunctional movement or a bad pattern, or that's what's causing your pain. So something I want you to keep in mind is movement is problem solving. The body just picks the best solution to solve the problem that is in front of it. So what I do as a movement professional is I work to try and give you better solutions to the problems that your body is trying to solve. The body doesn't just pick a pattern for no reason. The only time something is dysfunctional is if you have a true structural issue. Otherwise, there's no incorrect or correct pattern. Now, there may be, so anterior tilt is a very popular thing the coach likes to talk about. Anterior tilt's what's causing your back pain. Anterior tilt's what's causing your hamstring issues. Anterior tilt's what's causing your tight quads. It's not necessarily the anterior tilt that's the problem. It's the inability to get in and out of it that can become an issue, right? So we've just reframed that. So those of you who work with clients in person, it's those words that matter. As soon as you tell someone they have a bad pattern or their movement's dysfunctional, they're going to attach themselves to that. My back pain is because of my anterior tilt. And now they're going to build this story and take that with them for who knows how long. So there is no bad pattern. Your body learned to move to solve the problems that it faces daily. Right? So now we've just changed the whole conversation on what movement is. Right? So in like powerlifting, we'll talk about, right? There's nothing wrong with the movement, but they have to brace and stand under load at all times. Right? They got to bear down, they got to pull the bar down when they're squatting, they have to brace and just create all this tension. You ever watch a good mover, they're fluid. Watch any good football player and baseball player, they're fluid. Watch most powerlifters walk, they're not very fluid. So they're almost like stuck in the position they train the most, the law of specificity. There's nothing wrong with the pattern. It's just their inability to get in and out of that pattern. Okay. So all clients that I work with, for me, it starts with breathing and walking. Can you breathe well and can you walk well? Right? And most people are like, well, yeah, it's breathing and walking. Why would that matter? Well, I'm going to tell you why it matters. All right. So breathing. Depends on where you look, but if you Google how many breaths per day an average human takes, it's 23,000 breaths. The average human lives 78 years. So that's 654,810,000 breaths that you'll take in a lifetime. When I see that number, I'm like, holy shit, man, that is a lot of reps. Can you imagine squatting 23,000 times in a pattern that maybe isn't advantageous long-term? It has the potential to cause issues elsewhere. Walking. They say super active is 10,000 steps per day. To me, again, that is a lot of reps. So what we're going to talk about for the remainder here is we're going to talk about the mechanics of walking and athletic movement, and we're going to talk about the mechanics of breath. Okay. So whenever I'm looking at movement, I'm looking at the spine, the rib cage, and the pelvis. Doesn't matter what we're trying to do. Can they move their spine well? Can they move their rib cage well? Can they move their pelvis well? We can take our arms and legs away and we can still move. Okay. Look at this thing. The spine is just this gorgeous structure that so many coaches and practitioners have told us, you need to stay in neutral spine. Don't load your spine. Don't move your spine, right? There's 120 plus muscles that attach to the spine, but we're telling people not to move it. We're saying anti-movement, right? Anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension. My thing as a movement professional is if the joint has that range of motion, we maybe want to be strong in that range of motion. That's just me, okay? When you look at all of these, there's 100 joints in the spine alone, right? Between the vertebrae, where they touch to each other, there's facet joints, there's where the ribs attach to the vertebrae. Those all need to move. Okay, can you imagine not moving? Like, say you broke your arm and it's stuck in like a 90-degree angle for 8 weeks, and you get your cast off and you go to move it, it hurts. Your body is like, cool, we don't move that anymore. So it starts to actually deteriorate the nerves because it's like, hey, we don't do this anymore. We have to conserve energy. So if you stop moving through your ranges of motion, and then people get hurt when they go to like tie their shoe, like the big power lifters, right? It's because they don't practice bending over, because they're like, oh, we don't want to train, flexion, right? So the spine moves 4 ways. It rotates side to side or lateral flexion, and then flexion and extension. They'll say 3 ways. I say it's 4 ways. So there are several theories on how human gait is. The two big ones are the passenger theory, which is that the legs are what drive movement. And then there's the spinal engine theory. I personally prescribe to the spinal engine theory. This, I believe he's Russian, Sergei Grakovetsky, can never pronounce his name right. I believe he was studying salamanders. And then he started looking at people with no legs and arms and noticed that they still had the same walking movement as somebody with legs and arms. So the theory is the spine drives all movement. So if you can imagine, you didn't have access to range of motion in your lower back because we've been telling people not to move their lower back. But when we actually watch people move, we need the lower back to laterally flex. We need it to move to the side. So if we look in this picture here, this lower back is bending to the left in order to bring the left side of the pelvis forward. Then what it's doing is it's rotating the upper part to the right. So if the pelvis is going to the left, the chest has to go to the right, opposite arm, opposite leg, in order to drive movement. And if you look at the evolution of human movement, we started as fish, then we came on to land as salamanders, and now this is how babies crawl. This is what we call a cross-crawl patterning. And you can see on the baby here, it's the same thing. There's that lateral flexion in the lower back, that left pelvis comes forward, and then the upper right side is rotating. This is just how we've evolved as humans. Well, how do we see this in sport? Perez, I think, looks the best here, right? Here's his right pelvis is coming forward. He's bending to the right, and his left side is rotating. right? So now if you can imagine, hey, we're going to do anti-movements. Now, I'm not saying planks or like Pallof presses aren't important or don't have their place. But for someone that is just trying to move better, and with the majority of my clients, and they'll tell you when the first time I assess them, a lot of them don't have very good spinal mechanics. They don't go into those positions, but we were built for this. Somewhere along the line, we became adults and we're just going to sit all day. We're not going to move our spine, or we're going to tell people it's dangerous to move their spine, right? And then David Weck, he came up with what's known as the coiling core, which is essentially the same thing as the spinal engine theory. He just turned it into, hey, I'm going to market this and make a business out of it. David Weck is a genius. He to me, he is like on the same level as Louis Simmons is when it comes to movement. He seems out of his mind, but Sean, I believe he's in San Diego. But the dude's an absolute nutcase, but he's a genius. So they call what's called a short side, long side. Okay. So if we look at the baby here, the left side is a short side and the right side is a long side. Well, where does this happen in sport? Pitcher, short side, long side. Mike Tyson, short side, long side. Short side. Now you're going to start seeing this every time you're looking at people move. I know I did. Greatest athlete ever, Bo Jackson, short side, long side, short side, long side. It's the spinal engine theory. It's the coiling core. So we're going to talk about the pelvis in more detail on another call. We'll talk about the shoulder and the hip on different calls, but this kind of just sets that tone. Okay. So I just took a very complex topic here of the spinal engine theory and tried to explain it in like 3 slides. So here's what's going on again. Spinal engine. If I'm going to bring my left leg forward, my lumbar or my lower back is going to flex to the side on the left in order to bring the left side of the pelvis forward. The right side of our upper chest or our thoracic is going to rotate and turn down. Again, it's just opposite arm, opposite leg, which we see in here. Opposite arm, opposite leg, short side, long side, right? On Perez here, his left side is his long side. Here's his right side is his short side. We need to have lateral flexion plus rotation to have like a very powerful core. And then in baseball, we call it like the oblique sling or this X factor, this connection from the hip to the shoulder. So if you can imagine, you can't move your thoracic spine very well or move your rib cage well. So a lot of people I work with, they'll actually, if we tell them to touch their toes, they actually go like C-spine to their lower back and they skip their whole thoracic spine. Imagine not having good movement in thoracic spine, but you're trying to create all this power. Well, it's going to have to come from somewhere else. And that's when you're going to start to see injuries because you're going to have joints and muscles doing jobs that they're not supposed to be doing. Right. So we see like low back issues when like the hip's not doing the job to the best of its ability, or the ankle's not doing its best to its ability, or the diaphragm. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the mechanics of breathing and death to the belly breath. I had an article on Elite FTS a couple years ago on death to the belly breath. I'm very passionate about this. As we talked about, we come in on an inhale in life and we leave on an exhale. There's a lot of reps in between. So they talk 360 degrees expansion. We should get air movement into the front of our chest. We should get air movement into the side, and we should get air movement into the back. So I'm going to switch over. I'm going to draw some pictures here because I think it's a little easier to understand. So inhale is going to be associated with expansion, which is going to be associated with fight or flight. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. Exhale is compression and rest and digest. So all right. Hopefully this works. Okay. So it's the diaphragm right here. Okay. And it attaches here on the low back. When we inhale, the diaphragm comes down. Okay. Abdominal wall comes here. So we want 360 degrees of expansion in the chest. So what that means is that whatever's happening in the chest is happening in the belly. Let the chest take the air. That's where our lungs are. Belly's got enough shit going on with internal organs and everything. Okay. So when this comes down over here, what this actually is going to do is we're going to get pressure forward. We're going to get pressure into the back. Okay. Pressure forward. What we'll actually see in the low back is we'll see the low back lose its curve. The pelvis will actually tilt under, what we call a posterior tilt. All right. So we're actually getting like this curvature here, like this. Okay. Now, most people who they call a chest breather, right? They'll be like here and they'll go like this and they'll get this big chest forward and coaches will be like, they're a chest breather. Well, yeah, but they just have air. They have mismanagement of air. All their pressures going here into the front. So when we inhale, things expand. So if we just see movement in the front of the chest, we just have expansion in the front of the chest. We need expansion 360 degrees. Okay. All right. When we exhale, so here's the thing, most people don't fully exhale. This comes up. The T-spine will actually come this way. Low back, it'll actually increase its curvature. And we'll get an anterior tilt. Abdomen will get tighter. And we see something like this. It's called compression. So what I want all of you to do right now, it may be difficult because most of us are in a state of inhalation, which I'll touch on here in a second. So I want you to purse your lips like you're blowing up a balloon or blowing through a straw. And I want you to forcefully exhale. And you should feel your rib cage just compress. Okay. And if it's hard for some of you, and it very may well be, you're what we call in a state of inhalation or stress. Hope these pictures looked all right for everybody. So air is just management of volume and pressure, right? When we inhale, things expand. When you watch somebody breathe, we're just seeing where air goes. What we should see is 360 degrees of expansion. So we're going to talk about the physiology of breathing on another time, like how we can use our breath to manage our state. But for right now, I want you to think is when we inhale, the diaphragm actually will flatten. That's inhalation, okay? Expansion. The reason it's associated with fight or flight is because when we are in fight or flight, we need to bring in more oxygen to provide fuel in case we need to throw down or run away. So if that exhale was hard for some of you, you're probably in a stressful state most of the time. You're probably in a state of fight or flight. And now we have like almost like a mismanagement of hormones. So that gets pretty in depth with the physiology component. So if you're feeling stressed out, don't take a deep breath. Let a deep breath go. Get all the air out. Have 3 long ass exhales, and you will actually feel your state shift from fight or flight to rest or digest. So when anybody's feeling stressed out or they don't have a handle on anything, the one thing you can always control is your breath. You have complete control of it. And from an evolutionary standpoint, why did we choose to have subconscious and conscious control over our breath? I think that's something worth looking into to help take control of how we feel. Okay. So when I work with people, I look at how they breathe. I don't, your belly breath. I want air to go into the chest, but if most people aren't getting expansion into the rear part of their rib cage, and you guys will see why this is important when it comes to shoulder issues, because if you're not getting expansion into the rear part of your rib cage, it's going to affect the relationship between the rib cage and the shoulder blade, and then the shoulder blade and our upper arm or the humerus. People forget that the scapula and the rib cage is a joint, and that joint is influenced by the movement of air. The ribs, where they attach on our spine, are influenced by the movement of air. Our vertebrae influenced by the movement of air, which also then moves fluid, which is very important when it comes to our lymphatic system. right? So if our diaphragm's not moving fully, we start to get stagnant fluid with our blood, our lymphatic system, our hormones, and then it starts to affect. So it's just this ripple effect. This is why I always start with breathing. So look at this beautiful, look at this. So the diaphragm's right here at the top. This is what it looks like when it's fully exhaled. This thick ass pork tenderloin looking guy right here, that's your psoas. It ties in up behind the diaphragm. So if people only have air moving to the front, they're only getting movement out of the front part of their fibers on their diaphragm. If you're not getting great movement with this back part of your diaphragm, it can choke that psoas, which then we have a psoas that won't do its job to the best of its ability, which then will affect the glutes' job to do their job. Well, look at this other muscle. Where do people have issues? Their QL, their low back. Look who's attached to the QL. It's the diaphragm. And then you have major arteries, nerves, lymphatic system, all intertwined with this right here. Your diaphragm and the mechanics of your breathing affects more than we even realize. And that's why I want to teach it to you guys. It's free. It's really simple. It's really simple things, but we're going to give you guys some tools to use for this. So then now you have tools. If I'm feeling a little tight or a little beat up, let me try some breath things. Oh, that worked. Right? Because it could be something as simple as that. And most of my clients that I work with, usually it is, if we just get them into a rest or digest and get their diaphragm moving better, they start to feel better. And sometimes that might be all they need. And then once we get the diaphragm moving better, then we can focus on moving the spine better and go inside out. Now, when it comes to walking, I will say, like, that doesn't mean that the ankle and the knee and the hip aren't important. Okay. The spine gets a bad rep with many professionals. I just want you guys to know that your body adapts, and for you to move your spine, like Billy, I know you can attest to it, man. Like, move your spines. These are super fucking important. You have 13 million neurons that run in and out of this bad boy. It's a communication highway. So if you're stuck in a position, so this whole posture thing, right? What do they tell people to do? They tell them to go like this. Well, then they lose the curvature of their upper back. I think perfect posture has caused more issues than we realize. Millions of band pull parts, wearing bow ties. Not to shit on Donnie. Donnie, I love Donnie. But this is not perfect posture. This is not good posture. We want like that curvature in our upper back. And we lose, most of the clients I work with, they lose that. All right, so belly breath. This is what we usually see. We see people push their bellies forward, which then pulls the low back forward and increases the curvature of that low back. But I just showed you when we inhale, we want the low back to lose its curvature. You're training the wrong things. When the diaphragm comes down, we want it to push out 360 degrees. Not this. This is what we want. So 2 things. I'm going to give you guys a link. I'll post it in the Discord. I want you to move your spines daily. It's non-negotiable. I feel you should move all of your joints for your age for reps daily. But let's just start with our spine. 10 reps in each range: lateral flexion, side to side, flexion and extension, and rotation. But what I want you to do is I want you to be conscious with it. We want to be able to segment each part of our vertebrae. Because what can happen is they did a study in monkeys. They sewed their 2 fingers together, and what was once 2 different nerves coming out of the brain, once they sewed it, the brain actually rewired itself to what was once 2 fingers was now 1. So if your thoracic spine, which has 12 vertebrae, and you have the inability to segment them, or like 2 vertebrae become 1, the brain will rewire itself. And then remember that movement's going to have to come from somewhere else. Okay. And the other thing I want you to do is practice full exhalations. Okay. I don't want to give you too much. I just want you to be mindful of your breathing. Where am I putting air? What is my rib cage doing? Most of I would say your bottom part of the front part of your rib cage is up and forward. That bad boy needs to be down, right? The best way to get that down is to fully exhale. You'll actually feel your obliques turn on. You'll feel your abs turn on when you do that full exhale. That's it, man. It's my philosophy. Breathe well, move often, strengthen always. This is my philosophy for working with anybody. If we do these things, like everything else in life tends to kind of fall in order right behind it. But it's why I always start with these three things. And then we can work on like the higher end stuff, like passion and work and relationships. That's it. That's all I got. Cool. Questions, comments, concerns? So breathing technique. So this is what I mean. So I'm going to bring this back up again here. Share my screen. All right. All right. So upper back. Oh, sorry about that. I'm still learning how to do this. I think it's a very cool tool I got. All right. So upper back is round, lower back. Okay. Pelvis, rib cage. Give me a minute. All right, not bad. All right, so the diaphragm attaches here at the low back. This is what it looks like when we fully exhale. So what most people do is they'll say belly breath, right? And what that does is it'll push the air forward here. It pushes the air this way, pushes the air this way. Whatever's happening in the front part of the body or whatever's happening in the chest is happening in the abdomen. So if you were to videotape yourself from the side, and if all you saw was the front part of your rib cage moving, that's the only place we're getting air. It's the only place that's expanding. When we inhale, things expand. So if you only see one part moving, that probably means you're getting expansion in the front and then compression in the back. If we're getting compression in the back, when I'm working with people, we probably need to work on drills that put them in position to expand the compressed parts. So what happens when we, on a normal inhale, what should happen is the diaphragm should come down, drawing air in. This will cause expansion 360 degrees of the rib cage. Lower back will lose its curvature. The pelvis will slightly tuck under, and the abdomen will actually, you get 360. So you have air coming everywhere. And then just think when we exhale, it's the opposite. All those arrows go the other way. The lower back will increase its curvature. The pelvis will tilt forward and everything compresses. So just think expansion, compression. Inhale is expansion. If we watch people breathe and you only see movement into the front part of the body, it probably means they just have expansion in the front, compression in the back. All right. Brian, did that answer that? I'll wait for him to respond. Russell, you got it. Yeah, Susanna, like that. Yeah, crawling, it would be a form of spinal training. I do a lot of crawling with people because once we were able to walk, we stopped crawling. But again, remember, it's the law of specificity. So if you can get on all fours and you can move your spine the same way and just flexion and extension on all fours, flexion and extension and half kneeling, flexion and extension on a tall, like this is what, when people are like, I don't know how to move. Well, just start with moving your spine sitting. Do it kneeling. Do it on all fours. Right? Start to explore that movement, right? We talked the possibility for movement is infinite, right? You can't calculate it. It's infinite, right? Just the foot alone, it's insane, right? So imagine like your foot or your ankle doesn't have access to the range of motion, or those joints aren't functioning to the best of their ability. Now you take 10,000 steps a day, and now you're 30 years old and you've taken 10,000 steps a day. That's a lot of fucking steps. So doing 3x10 on calf raises and ankle inversion 2 times a week isn't going to help the issue. And here's the thing, like, you need to do thousands and thousands of reps for your brain to be like, yeah, we're going to pick a different pattern for this solution. Because right now you're the byproduct of however old you are is your movement. So I'm 36. This is 36 years of movement. I've got enough issues. And it's just every day it's addressing the same things to convince the brain and the body, hey, this is what we're actually doing. Billy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've done a lot of the Kabuki stuff. I'm sure you've listened to that. And I know one drill that Chris taught me that helped out tremendously. And I know, especially when it comes to when you're first starting to learn how to breathe and move the diaphragm, was the weight belt test. I don't know if you've ever done that with any of your clients or if you're familiar. A lot of people, like we were talking about, trying to expand down and back and trying to get that 360, especially to get the lower back to push out. One of the things that the Kabuki team does, and it works like gangbusters. If you're having trouble figuring out if you're actually getting in full range, is lay flat on the ground, knees bent, feet flat on the floor, and take a regular weight belt and throw it underneath your lower back and practice breathing, especially trying to breathe back and down. And if you're doing it properly, if you can actually pull in and actually get that diaphragm to compress, your lower back will push hard enough against the ground that nobody can pull a belt out from underneath your lower back. So in some cases, you'll have just have a training partner or somebody like, hey, can you pull this out? Like take, practice, take your breath and just give a quick nod. And if they can pull, I mean, it doesn't, not like yank, but a general, medium pull or whatever, the belt will stay in place. Yeah. So if you can actually, and it's a good way to just practice to see if what you're doing in all the other positions will actually help translate over. So when you're flat, it'll actually, it's just a quick test that you can use to actually help utilize seeing if you're progressing and actually holding it in the 360.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tool to use. I'll also start, like I was saying, with the when you guys fully exhale, I don't know if you felt the bottom ribs come down. And when they come down, that's where we want them to be on the inhale. And for a lot of people, they'll have trouble keeping that bottom rib cage down. So once we train that, I would say they have like lower rib, they have poor mobility of their lower ribs. We look at what's called an infrasternal angle. Can their infrasternal angle, when they inhale, can it open? When they exhale, can it come down? Inhale, come down. Most people are stuck. Most of the lifters are stuck here with the wide sternal angle, we call it. And by getting them to close that down and getting the rib cage down, they actually then the lower back will expand. So that's what we start with, the rib cage and then the pelvis. Can they move their pelvis, right? Because when we inhale, the pelvis will actually tuck under. We'll talk about like pelvic movement with squatting and deadlifting. But then, putting a belt under, I'll put my hands under, like, hey, breathe into my hands. Because it's tricky, right? So we get into breathing and then bracing, right? When I want people to be able to casually pull their bottom ribs down, when you guys maybe exhale, you'll feel your abs engage. I want you to have like that mobility to like just move fluidly. So when we talk about like bracing, right, we have to be not careful, but that's with a belt. With all you lifters, be careful using your belt. Learn to use your diaphragm and actually how to brace without a belt. Yeah. Questions, comments, concerns? I know. Ryan, what's up, buddy?
So what would you suggest if you have a desk job and you're sitting at a desk for like 8 or 9 hours a day? And like my case, it's almost like you almost turn into like a flow state that you're not even like paying attention. That's like, oh wait, I need to breathe.
So breathing, I would suggest just doing breathing like 5 to 10 minutes. So from like a mechanical standpoint, I would spend like 5 minutes a day on breathing. So we talk about a breath practice. right? You can do it before training. You can do it in the morning. You do it before bed, right? It doesn't take as much as you think. We just need to slap the brain in like, hey, reminder, you still can do this stuff. And as far as the spinal movement, I have my clients set like a timer for 60 or 90 minutes. Hey, move for 5 minutes. But even sitting here, I can rotate. I can go side to side. I can still come here. I can still come here, right? I can still do those movements, right? Like I had that picture of the guy with no arms and legs. Like we can still move our spine sitting, right? You can still move your shoulders. You still move your neck, your knees, your feet. So just set a timer and say, hey, like at this time, I'm going to move my spine. This time, I'm going to move my shoulders. This time, I'm going to move my neck.
Right.
That's why I call them spare moments, right? So we have spare moments throughout the day where we're either swiping on our phone, we're just, I call it putzing. I putz around the house. My dogs are putzing around the yard. You have time for movement. It's just being aware of the time. So like when I'm cooking, I'll do my ankle work, my inversion. I have a really bad ankle. So I like for 15 years of just every day, it's the same hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reps to facilitate that. So while I'm cooking, I'll just move my ankles. I'll move my hips. I like to dance, throw some music on. Like, don't just, you talk about a flow state, just put on your favorite song and just like see what it does to your body. No one's around to watch. Don't be embarrassed. Like, just let the music kind of take hold of you if you like music. I know some of you in here, Brian, I'm looking at you, don't like music. But, you know, just find creative ways to include movement throughout your life. You know, instead of sitting at I work from home, so I sit on the floor all day. So I'm constantly having to change positions.
Right.
I think setting that timer is a big thing. There's just, you know.
Yeah.
Billy, is your hand still up or is that from last time? But like I thought, like Billy's story last week, like he kind of like hit it home for me. Like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like the dude had to start from square. He had to learn how to crawl. He literally had to rewire his brain to teach him how to do a cross crawl patterning so he can slowly build up from that. And his brain was like, brain's like, we don't do this anymore, man. We're checking out. Like we've had enough, right? But it shows how much movement he had to do. But it also shows that you can accomplish a lot in a short amount of time. But you got to put the reps in. Your 3x10 isn't going to fix anything, right? Because when you go to PT, they give you the white sheet of paper, they give you the 6 exercises to do at home, and then they're boring as hell. They are boring as hell. Some of those movements are boring. If I have a wrist issue and I got to do this all day, yeah, right? Because we don't want to get you to where you were before the injury happened, because where you were before the injury happens is what actually caused the injury. PT usually gets you to about 80 to 90% better. And then like, you're good to go. You're not. We got to get you to like 100. We don't want to get you to normal. We got to get you to be abnormal. We got to be, you're the thing that causes you. We have to be a fucking machine, right? We just have to build you. Like I say, weaponize your body, right? That's go out and express it. We want to push you to the brink. And then when something breaks, we know where we got to go. So I don't know if anybody did that hike, but like when things start flaring up, I took that 12-mile hike this weekend, my ankle, my knee. So I know what I need to work on. Because if I went any further, I'm not sure my knee would have held up. So now I know what I need to do in training. You know, like Brian with your ACL, right? You're going to have to push it a little bit, and then you're going to have to back off. You're going to have to see what it's capable of and build trust. It's the other thing with injuries, building trust between the brain and your body. Questions, comments? So this week, I'm going to post a 3-way spine in the group and focus on, we'll call it closing the front ribs. You'll just lay on your back, fully exhale, like you're trying to blow out a candle. And then when you go to take the inhale, try and keep your bottom ribs down and you'll feel where that air is going. Just play around with it. See where you can push air, right? You should be able to control where air goes. And if you don't have a rib cage that expands fully, it means your lungs don't expand fully. then you're not getting great oxygenation of your tissues. And we'll talk about that from a physiological standpoint, which is even, that's a crazy world, is the physiological aspects of breath and how we can manage that. So yeah, cool. If no one's got any questions, man, we can cut this out. It is 8:48. I'll post that link in the group. This video will be up here today or tomorrow, and we'll go from there. If you guys have any suggestions or topics you want to see, let me know. I think next week someone asked me about like how we can improve those aspects in the environment. But again, I always start with movement. Are you moving daily? If you're not, then that's where we got to start, because it's the one thing you can always control is your body. You can always take the walk. You can always take the breath. You can always let a breath go. When shit's hitting the fan and you're stressed out, let a breath go. Let that shit go. Don't take a deep breath, because that'll stress you out. Just let it go. Okay. You guys have my number. You have the Discord. Just if you have questions about anything, please don't hesitate. All right. And then I will see and talk to you all soon. Remember, get on a call with at least one person this week. Thanks for spending your Tuesday night with me. I'll see you guys soon.